All right, let's check in with everybody. Say hello. It is Occult Detective October, so we're going to go to fiction in just a minute. Going to read you a cool story. I want to show you a couple things, though. Some very cool stuff. This is a book that I picked up a while ago, edited by Peter Haining. Now, Peter Haining is, next to Stephen Jones, he's probably the other British editor of horror anthologies who's best known. Peter Haining's done a lot of good stuff. But this is cool because it's got all these different stories that are short stories that were later used for television. And the cool thing is he dedicated it to Basil Copper, the guy who created, the guy who carried on the Solar Pond stories from August Derleth. So very cool. And I actually picked this up at the Avenue Victor Hugo bookstore, which is the one that was on Newbury Street where Harlan Ellison wrote in the window. So that's pretty awesome. They're now in, oh, and by the way, they're in Lee, New Hampshire, not in Bow, New Hampshire. I mentioned Bow last week. It's Lee, which is just west of Durham, where University of New Hampshire is. So this has a bunch of really good short stories in it, and I might do one, an extra one next week. It's got stuff by E.F. Benson. I got to edit an anthology that'll be coming out from Borderland Books. Algernon Blackwood, of course, the writer of The Willows, just fantastic. Rod Serling's got one in here. Robert Bloch, creator of Psycho. Ambrose Bierce, Middle Toe of the Right Foot. Oh, that's a good one. So lots of great stuff there from those guys. That is a pretty hard to find book, Dead of Night. It's a hardcover. I'm pretty psyched about that. I also want to show you, I've got another book that I'm going to share. These are just like the unexplained. You know, one of these things you get at Barnes & Noble when you realize like all the shelves are just filled with romantasy for angry women for some reason, which is weird. And I've got another one that looks pretty good. These are all by a guy I've never heard of, but I picked this up super cheap, David Grubb. And I saw other books that he had written. I was like, there's good short stories. So we might share some of those as well. But since it is Occult Detective October, if you watch Michael K. Vaughan, if you watch other people in Booktube, they love doing certain themes every once in a while. So September was Sumerian September, reading maybe a Conan story or something like that from Robert E. Howard. And so I actually am going to send something off to Michael K. Vaughan that is part of the collection of Robert E. Howard stories that I edited for Borderlands Books. But I want to mention this month, I'm looking forward to what I think I want to do is read you one of the stories. Remember how we read Joseph Payne Brennan's Canavan's Calling and Canavan's Backyard? Canavan's Backyard being the first of the stories about the bookseller in New Haven, Connecticut. And basically, Joseph Payne Brennan tells the story about how he used to go to this bookseller, was at his house, and the guy had this weird backyard. He just kept staring at all the high bramble grass and all those things. And it was like it just stretched on forever. That was Canavan's Backyard, which is just one of the best. It's so cool. Very mysterious. He wrote the sequel 20-something years later because people loved it so much, called Canavan's Calling. And that also is very, very good. Well, as I mentioned, at the time that I've read those stories, he created an occult detective named Lucius Leffing. And I always thought it'd be really cool to have Lucius Leffing go to the site of that building site after it's all collapsed and start to investigate what was described in Canavan's Backyard and Canavan's Calling. And I wonder if Joseph Payne Brennan, I think his daughter, I think we mentioned his daughter is a writer, maybe I could contact her and see if I could get permission to write a story that would bring Lucius Leffing, the occult detective, into that world. I will say that Lucius Leffing's assistant in the stories is Joseph Payne Brennan. So he is the Watson to the Holmes type character of Lucius Leffing. And of course, Holmes, if there were ever any occult overtones, he would always prove that it was just material problems, person-on-person conflicts. Even Hound of the Baskervilles, it's very spooky, but you know that. However, Conan Doyle did believe in the occult stuff and the supernatural and attended seances, and he was friends with Harry Houdini, who was a skeptic and would debunk these people, but they were friends. So kind of neat stuff to see all those people talking to each other and things like that. Very interesting. That was the time of Madame Blavatsky just coming off of her stuff, and the Golden Dawn stuff then arose and all that stuff. And then you get Aleister Crowley coming around, and that influenced a lot of people in the next few decades. People like Jimmy Page and others who were really into that stuff, and then got out of it, like David Bowie. I think he was really thankful he got out of it. Very cool. So very interesting things there. We're going to go with the Lucius Leffing in just a little while, but let's get started on Booktube. I got a story ready for you, my friends. We're going to go back to my script writing days at Star Trek and the Outer Limits. It's time for our Booktube segment for Fiction Friday. Relax, grab a toasted marshmallow or whatever. It's time to hear from the control voice for Booktube.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
All right, everybody, if you're joining us on the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel, thank you very much. I'm Gardner Goldsmith. We have people here from the Liberty Conspiracy audience, and on Friday nights, when we go live on Liberty Conspiracy at 6 p.m. Eastern U.S. time and spread the Russian propaganda, we often enjoy talking about entertainment, fiction, that sort of stuff. On Fridays, we do Fiction Friday, where I pick one story, maybe two stories, read them out loud, sometimes give an update on a novella that I've been working on called Tower. And then on Wednesdays, we focus on a particular writer. We call that Wordsmith Wednesday, or at least the Russian team and I here in Moscow, Hampshire do so. So as we spread the Russian propaganda, let's get started on Occult Detective October. And I have not been directly in touch with folks like Michael Vaughn or others, but I've commented on a lot of their channels. And if you are watching, one of you fine creatives at Booktube, thank you for all the great book suggestions and great taste and fun. I love it. And as a fellow scribe and person who admires many of the writers you admire and worked at a couple TV shows, The Outer Limits and Star Trek Voyager, I welcome you to my Booktube channel, the former Star Trek Writing Fellow. So I'm going to go with this one. This came out a number of years ago from Talos Press. A lot of people have this who are interested in Sherlock Holmes, Holmesiania, the Victorian era, or occult detectives, pulp fiction and horror and things like that. Fighters of Fear. And this is good. This one, Mike Ashley. Mike Ashley's been doing a lot of the recent British Library anthologies. So he's for the past few years sort of moved into the space that Peter Haining used to have. And of course, Stephen Jones is still incredibly dominant there. The guy's amazing. Stephen's a great guy. Great guy. I've gotten to mention Stephen a couple times in the comments section at some of their channels. And the wonderful thing that Stephen did to let me sell my book at the World Fantasy Convention when the publishing company didn't get it, and it was supposed to have been released that morning. And I came back later in the afternoon, and Stephen said, they found the book. And then he let me sell the book at a particular time later in the day. That was real nice. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to give you a story that I think it's interesting because they have so many different stories in here. They've got stories by A.M. Burridge, Seabury Quinn. Let's see. Mark Valentine is in here. Joseph Payne Brennan. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Joseph Payne Brennan. We'll go with Joseph Payne Brennan later. Manly Wayne Wellman. We've read one of his stories. That is a good one. The Shonokins. We've got stories Yep, William Hope Hodgson, Sax Rohmer. We read Run from Sax, the creator of Dr. Fu Manchu, after I got back from seeing Fu Manchu play live. That was awesome. And so I want to go with this one. It's called The Tapping on the Wainscott by Alan Upward. Again, it's about occult detectives, because there were many detectives who were very popular using the Holmes Watson motif of a sleuth and an assistant, but looking into some of the more bizarre. And Carl Kolchak would be considered an occult detective, even though he's not officially listed as a detective. He would be a newspaper reporter looking into things. If you ever get a chance, you want to read a really good short story by Stephen King, read Night Flyer. That one is basically Kolchak without the name, because he couldn't get the Kolchak name to use it. But here we go. This is called The Tapping on the Wainscott. Going to give you some background here. They do a really good job in this book on giving the background for all the different writers and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Mr. Ashley does a good job. This is by Alan Upward. Alan Upward. The Tapping on the Wainscott. Background. Following the success of the Flaxman Lowe series, the publisher C. Arthur Pearson sought to repeat the experiment, running Alan Upward's The Ghost Hunters series in the Royal magazine in 1905, and Jessie Adelaide Middleton's rather more factual The True Ghost Stories in Pearson's magazine in 1907. Upward's series is significant for including a woman investigator, Miss Sargent, who is the secretary to the firm of estate agents Mortimer and Hargreaves, but also has talents as a medium. Although Jack Hargreaves, who buys and sells haunted houses, initially has some concerns, he soon realizes how useful Alwyn Sargent's talents are, and thereafter they form a team. The first story in the series, The Story of the Green House, Wallington, is a fairly mundane episode, but Upward found the right mood with this next story. A barrister by training, but with a yearning to be a politician, George Allen Upward, born in 1863 and died in 1926, led a rather diverse, one might almost say, impulsive career. Besides his literary works as poet, novelist, and essayist, he fought as a volunteer in the invasion of Turkey by the Greeks in 1897. He was in charge of a mission to Macedonia in 1907. And at the start of the First World War, he traveled to Belgium. Holy Belgium, man! Dressed in his scoutmaster's uniform. He enjoyed exploring secret histories and was perhaps best known for the series Secrets of the Courts of Europe that ran in Pearson's magazine during 1896. He also wrote two series of historic mysteries during 1900 and 1901 and Behind the Scenes of Europe in 1917. His death was itself something of a mystery. He was found dead of a gunshot wound at his cottage, but his adopted son, Richard, who was in bed upstairs, heard no shot, and both he and Upward's sister did not believe that Upward was depressed. A verdict of suicide, while of unsound mind, was recorded, but was it an accident or something more sinister? Among his books was The Discovery of the Dead, published in 1910, where a scientist discovers a way of communicating with the dead, or necromorphs, which is the next stage of spiritual existence after death. Oh, solving the crimes, finding out things. Well, here is The Tapping on the Wainscott by Alan Upward. 1905. Actually, 1906, I believe. The mysterious incident, which I'm going to narrate, is one which seems to have a particular interest for those who study occult phenomena. According to some who have discussed it with me, it throws an important light on the conditions which prevail in the world of spirits and the limitations to their action. However, I do not care to say anything on the subject myself. My object is simply to set down facts and leave others to draw their own conclusions. It was about a year after the affair of the greenhouse Wallington, already related, when our firm received instructions from the solicitors of Sir Henry Wheatman to dispose by auction of his family mansion, Halesbury Manor, Sussex. I was told that Sir Henry was a distant relation who had recently come into the title and estate of the death of the last baronet, and preferred to live abroad. The furniture and effects had been sold already by a firm of auctioneers, well known for their sales of that kind, and the house and estate were to follow. I went down with a clerk to view the place, and found it to be a very handsome old Jacobean mansion, with valuable oak wainscot in all the principal rooms. The caretaker who showed us over it was a dear old lady who had been housekeeper to the last baronet, and was evidently heartbroken at the prospect of the old family seat passing into the possession of strangers.
Sir Christopher, that's my late master, would turn in his grave if he knew what was being done with the old place, she lamented, and I shouldn't wonder if he did know.
I was busy directing the clerk and taking measurements of the more important rooms, and did not pay much heed to this obscure intimation. In due course, we reached the first floor, and the housekeeper conducted us into a great square room with a huge fireplace and 2 windows commanding a view over the park. I was surprised to find that this room had not been stripped so completely as the ones downstairs. It still contained a magnificently carved oak bed, a 4-poster, equal in size to the bedroom of any modern flat.
This is the room Sir Christopher died in, the old lady said impassively. He died in that bed King Charles I once slept in.
Oh, and why hasn't it been removed like the rest of the furniture? I naturally asked.
It is fixed to the floor, for one thing, was the answer, and Sir Henry thought it would fetch more by leaving it where it is, but I believe he would have taken it away now if he knew what I know.
Mrs. Musgrave, as the old housekeeper was named, nodded her head and pursed her lips, after the manner of old ladies when they have a secret which they are longing to tell, but which they think it due to their dignity only part of the telling is all right, unless there were pressure. Why? What is it you know? I asked this with an interest by no means feigned.
Perhaps I ought not speak of it, the housekeeper returned, with a glance at my clerk.
I sent the young woman into the other room, and repeated my question.
Well, sir, it may be that I ought not to be the first to mention it, but it's being talked of in the village, and if you didn't hear it from me, you'd hear it from somebody else, most likely.
Miss Musgrave lowered her voice.
The house is haunted, sir.
Remembering my late grisly experience, I did not reply as lightly as I might have done once to such a statement. I remembered what had happened to us in the past, so I took things seriously. Haunted? In what way?
You may believe me, or you may not, sir, Miss Musgrave said with deliberation, evidently in no hurry to come to the point. There are some who can hear it, and some who can't. Some say it's only fancy, and others that it's the spirit of Sir Christopher. But all I can say is, I wouldn't pass a night in this room again, not if you were to offer me £50.
This was not very pleasant in the hearing. If a report of this kind were current in the village, it would be pretty sure to reach the ears of any intending purchaser, and perhaps choke him off. An old family ghost,
or the tradition of one, is sometimes considered an attraction to a venerable country seat. But any really unpleasant phenomenon, particularly if of quite recent date, would be very decidedly a drawback in most people's eyes. Can you tell me exactly what you did here? I asked. It's a tapping, sir. A tapping on the wainscot, just over there. She pointed to the wall opposite the foot of the bed. I was laying asleep in the bed, sir, for when the house was stripped and Sir Henry went away, I thought there would be no harm in my sleeping there, and I wanted to say I had slept in the bed that King Charles slept in. But, well, it's my belief that Sir Henry must have heard the tapping himself, back then, and seen something as well. And it must have frightened him, and that's why he was so anxious to clear everything out of the house and leave it. I listened, hardly knowing what question to put next. At last I inquired, Do you suggest, is there any reason to suppose, that there was anything wrong about Sir Christopher Wheatman's death? The question took Miss Musgrave by surprise. Wrong, sir? Why should there be wrong? I'm sure the poor gentleman couldn't have died more peacefully. Miss Alice and I were with him the whole time. Who's Miss Alice? His daughter. At least, his adopted daughter. She had lived with him since she was a baby, and he made no difference between her and his own flesh and blood. Miss Musgrave's voice changed again, as she added, and in my belief, it's on her account that Sir Christopher walks. Why? Because when Sir Henry came down, he turned her out of the house with nothing but the clothes she stood in. Sir Christopher hadn't made a will, and he came into everything as the only heir. Miss Alice had to go to London and take a situation as a waitress. I mused in silence. Could there be anything in that strange suggestion? Was it not more likely that the old housekeeper's indignation at her new master's conduct had made her fancy that the ordinary noises of an old mansion by night were a protest on the part of the dead? Have you heard the tapping since? I asked. I hear it every night, said the startling answer. I've shifted my bed to half the rooms in the house, but it makes no difference. Wherever I am, the taps come. And then they move along the wall, by the staircases and the corridors, till they reach this room. And they stop here. Have you followed them? I exclaimed. I did the first time. Now I daren't, the housekeeper answered. But I got Jim Bateman from the lodge to come up one night, and he heard them and followed them, and they led him to the same place. And now he would no more cross the threshold of the house after dark than he would fly across. It was clear to me by this time that whatever fact or fancy, the story needed more investigation. I'm not naturally nervous, and in spite of the disagreeable memories of the last haunted house I had spent a night in, I determined to face whatever there was to face in Halesbury Manor. Accordingly, I arranged with Mrs. Musgrave, to make up a bed for me the next night but one. Not in the haunted room itself. That I did not feel disposed to risk, but so as to enable me to be at hand when the mysteries began. I was careful to say nothing in the office meanwhile, and above all, to keep the matter from the ears of my lady secretary, Miss Sargent. Miss Sargent had solved the mystery of the green house for me, but she had done so at the cost of an experience to which I could not think of exposing her a second time. On the appointed evening, I returned to Halesbury with a small dressing bag, prepared to stay the night. The housekeeper had prepared a bedroom for me on one of the upper floors, not far from her own. But as she told me that the ghostly tapping usually began about midnight, I decided to sit up for a while and persuaded her to do the same with me. We had supper together in a room downstairs, the old lady getting it ready herself. Not a girl in the village, it appeared, could be induced to remain in that house after sunset. After supper, Miss Mudgrave nodded off to sleep in a rocking chair before the fire, while I lit a cigar and waited in some excitement for what was to come. The room in which we sat was wainscoted, like all those on the ground floor. Every time a coal dropped from the fire or a window frame rattled, I fancied the mysterious summons had come and started nervously, right there in my chair. I believe it is not merely fancy which causes us to hear so many more small noises in a house at night than in the daytime, but that there is some scientific reason for it. Be that as it may, everyone must admit that the sense of hearing is more acute in the darkness than in the light. As 12 o'clock approached, I deliberately turned the lamp out, keeping a candle and some matches by my side. Hardly had I done this when I received a shock which nearly made me jump out of my chair. It was a tap, large, loud, sharp, and imperative, on the door of the room. In my agitation, the habitual phrase, "Come on," rose to my lips, and I uttered it. At the same moment, my companion woke with a start and stared about her wildly in the dim firelight. "Did you hear it?" she asked in an awestruck whisper. "Yes, did you?" As she nodded in answer, the tap sounded a second time, seeming fainter and further off. I rose to my feet and lit the candle. "Are you going to follow it?" the old woman breathed. "Yes. Will you come?" She shook her head. "I daren't. Give me the matches. Don't go till I have lit the lamp. I need it, for my sake." I lingered, my own nerves becoming affected in sympathy with hers, while the frightened woman clutched the box from my hand and struck a match. Then she applied it to the wick of the lamp. I watched, and at the same moment I heard the tap, for the third time, low and fading away in the distance. I strode to the door of the room, opened it, and passed out into the passage, leaving the door ajar. The ghostly tap sounded again, far away in front of me, at the foot of the great staircase. I strode after it, with quickening steps and throbbing pulses, carefully screening the candle flame with one hand against the breeze. I moved on up the stairs, seeming to fly before me, and it moved on up the stairs, seeming to fly before me, and I almost raced to catch up with that beckoning sound. Along the main corridor, I was drawn straight to the door of that death chamber. As I crossed the threshold, and the huge four-poster loomed up in the shadows, the character of the ghostly sound underwent a change. Instead of a single tap traveling with the speed of a terrified man fleeing from pursuit, it became a hurried knocking, moving round the room behind the wainscot, as if in search of something. I could have sworn that someone or something was feeling its way along. The daunting sounds arrived at the middle of the wall opposite the foot of the great bed, and became stationary. Once, twice, thrice, that awful tap broke the silence, louder and more menacing each time. And then all at once the flame of the candle turned blue and went out, leaving me in the stillness and the darkness with the feeling that I was not alone. How I got downstairs again I can hardly remember, but I am not ashamed to say that never was sight more welcome than the lamplight streaming through the open door onto the passage as I rushed towards it. Mrs. Musgrave gave me a glance and screamed, "Have you seen it?" No, I said, but the light went out, and I had no matches. I related my experience in a few words, and then made a confession. I cannot sleep in this house tonight, Mrs. Musgrave. I must go down to the village and try to get into the inn. To my relief, she offered no opposition. I fancy I was not the first person who had left her at the same hour for the same reason. Not even in the morning did I feel inclined to return to the haunted house. I went up to London by the first train and, going straight to the office, asked Miss Sargent to come into my room and told her everything. She listened with intense interest, not interrupting by so much as a movement until I had come to the end. Then she said with grave decision, I can picture it all. You must let me go down and spend a night in that room, Mr. Hargreaves. Don't think of such a thing, I exclaimed. I should never permit you to run the risk of such a shock as I had last night. It is a matter of necessity, Miss Sargent replied firmly. It is a matter of duty. I cannot doubt that the tapping on the wainscot has a meaning. It is a message from the dead. A message? I don't understand. I don't profess to understand it myself at present, but I do not believe that it is an ordinary case of what is called haunting, where a spirit appears to be bound in some way to a particular spot. Neither do I believe that the object of this manifestation has been to drive the new owner out of the house, or to render it uninhabitable. Well, then what do you suggest? I feel sure there is a reason for the taps always coming back to one particular place in the wall of that one room. A light seemed to break in her mind as she spoke, and she added quickly, I should not wonder if there were something hidden behind the wainscot, perhaps a will or a paper of some kind. I recalled what the housekeeper had told me about the adopted child of the dead man, turned adrift so heartlessly by the heir to his wealth. Pray heaven you're right, I ejaculated fervently. I will go down again and have the wainscot removed. But mind, this must be kept a strict secret. If Sir Henry Wheatman or his solicitors heard what I was doing, I might get into serious trouble. Out of gratitude for Miss Sargent's suggestion, I invited her to be present at the opening of the wainscot. I had confided my hopes and intentions to Mrs. Musgrave, who was intensely excited at the prospect of justice being done to her beloved young mistress. To think that I should never have guessed what it meant, she cried, and I thought I understood it better than anyone else, too. Did you think there was any reason for the tapping on that particular spot, then? Miss Sargent asked. To be sure I did. That is just where Miss Alice's picture used to be hung, so that Sir Christopher could see it every morning when he woke. Sir Henry had the picture sold with all the others, and I thought that was why Sir Christopher couldn't rest in his grave. I saw a look of disappointment steal over Miss Sargent's face. It may be that Miss Musgrave is right, she said thoughtfully. Very often the spirits seem to have very little motive, or what seems very little to us, for what they do. Well, we shall see, I responded, not willing to give up my hope on the poor orphan's behalf. I had brought down an expert cabinet maker from London, and he went to work quickly and neatly. A great piece of the wall was stripped of its wainscot, and we watched anxiously for any sign of a hiding place behind. We searched vainly. To the bitter disappointment of all three of us, there was not even a vestige, not so much as a scratch on the wall to indicate that anything had ever been concealed there. To complete our discomfiture, the cabinet maker gave it as his opinion that the wainscot had never been disturbed since it was put up in the reign of James I. I was right, you see, miss, said good Mrs. Musgrave sorrowfully. It's the thought of Miss Alice's picture that keeps Sir Christopher out of his grave. She spoke as though the deceased baronet were an invalid suffering from sleeplessness at night. Miss Sargent shook her head, but said nothing. She seemed to be reflecting deeply. We left the cabinet maker with strict instructions to replace the wainscot so as to leave no trace of his operations, and we went downstairs. Half an hour later, as we were sitting at lunch, Miss Sargent suddenly spoke. "You must let me sleep in that bed, Mr. Hargraves. I'm a clairvoyant. In sleep, as you know, I may see something which will explain this mystery." We both returned to town in the afternoon to make our arrangements. The following day we came down again, prepared to spend the night. None of us intended to go to bed. The four-poster in the haunted room had been furnished with blankets and pillows to serve as a bed for the clairvoyant. Miss Musgrave was to install herself on a sofa before the fireplace, in which a fire had been lit, and I was to sit in the next room, ready to come at the first call. Miss Sargent, who fortunately possessed the power of falling asleep at will, retired to her strange couch a little before 11, accompanied by the housekeeper, whose excitement promised to keep her awake. As for myself, I cherished no wish to sleep. I had provided myself with lights, cigars, and a book to read, but I am bound to confess that I found it impossible to get interested in the book. An hour later, I heard a low tapping on the door of my own room. Not a little startled, I sprang up, only to find that the sound this time was free from any element of mystery. The old housekeeper had come to summon me. "Will you come and see the lady?" she said. "I think something is the matter." I felt myself turning cold. "What do you mean? Has the tapping begun?" The answer surprised me. "No! That's what frightens me. This is the first night I've not heard it for 4 months. But I think Miss Sargent sees something." I led the way into the haunted room. There was not a sound to be heard, and the lights had been put out by the clairvoyant's desire, but she was sitting half up in bed, her eyes fast closed, and yet appearing to stare with the most deadly fear at the opposite wall. Suddenly a sharp cry broke from her, followed immediately by the same frantic rush of half-articulated syllables which had so alarmed me on that night in the greenhouse. "Leave it alone, leave it alone, leave it alone, put it back, put it back, put it back. Ah, he's taken it." With these last words, uttered loudly in distinct tones, the sleeper's eyes suddenly opened, and she gave a fearful shudder. Tap, tap, tap. If ever I've heard any sounds in my life, I heard these knocks by an unseen hand in the wainscot, at which we all gazed, unable to stir, till the knocks ceased. It was too much for the nerves of any of us to bear. I caught the half-fainted girl in my arms as she threw herself from the great four-poster bed, and the three of us did not breathe again till we were safe in the housekeeper's little sitting room downstairs. There, after she had rested and taken a soothing draught prescribed by the housekeeper, Miss Sargent related her vision. "I saw a picture hanging on the wall, the picture of a young girl, about 17, with blue eyes and very light golden hair." "Miss Alice," the old lady interrupted. "2 men came into the room and moved about. I could not see what they were doing. Presently, one of them, who was in his shirt sleeves and looked like a workman, approached the picture and raised his hand to take it down." "One of the auctioneer's men, my dear," said Miss Musgraves in a murmured voice. At that instant I saw suddenly, appearing from nowhere in front of the picture, a corpse. "A corpse!" we both said in horror. "Yes, a dead man, in a winding sheet, with his head swathed in white bandages. The corpse seemed to try to thrust back the living men. He went on without noticing. It, and the men went on without noticing it and took down the picture. I can hardly describe how, but just as though the corpse were not there, he took it down. The dead man seemed to try to detain him, but he walked off with it. That one man who finally took the picture, walked off, and then I awoke." A cry burst from the poor old housekeeper. "It was my poor old master," she moaned. trying to save Miss Alice's nice picture." The other said nothing, but bent her brows as though profoundly dissatisfied with this seemingly puerile interpretation of the mystery. I watched her with expectation. I come to look on Alwyn Sargent as a woman of more than ordinary powers of mind, apart together from her extraordinary occult faculty, and I confidently anticipated that she would not let the matter rest there. "The picture must have been replaced," she said, after a long interval of meditation. "We cannot leave things as they are. At all costs, the picture must be found and hung up there again, if it is only for one night." "I should think that could be managed," I said, though I did not much relish the idea of trying it. I saw that Miss Sargent wanted to make fresh trial of her clairvoyant powers with the picture in its place, and I dreaded the inquiry which these agitating experiences might likely do to her. I dreaded the injury which these agitating experiences seemed like they might do to her. However, I shared her feeling that the mystery must be probed to the bottom. The very next day, I called on the auctioneers who had charge of the sale of Halesbury Manor, and asked them to let me go through their books. I told them nothing except that I had been asked to recover a family portrait included in the sale by oversight. They were very obliging, and with their assistance, I found that a picture catalogued as "Portrait of a Girl" had been sold for £12 to a gentleman living in Sydenham. I went out there the same evening and saw the purchaser, who was a common councilman of the City of London, and evidently given to speculating in pictures, with which the house was crowded. He saw his advantage and drove a rather hard bargain with me, but in the end he agreed to let me have the picture to show to the client, whom I pretended to have in the background on my paying for a deposit. He then led me upstairs to a small smoking room, where I saw the picture hanging in an obscure corner. With hands trembling with excitement, I took hold of the frame to lift it off the nail. As I did so, the nail itself gave way, and the precious portrait crashed to the ground, the frame coming to pieces. I fell on my knees with a cry of dismay, when I was astonished to see, among the broken portions of the frame, a blue foolscap envelope, endorsed in shaky handwriting, "Will of Sir C. Westman, Bart." The will gave the whole of his property to his adopted daughter, Alice Wheatman. Human nature is a curious thing. As soon as I had made out the contents of the document thus miraculously discovered, and he knew that the picture was that of a young lady who had come into a great fortune, the owner insisted on my accepting it as a free gift for the fortunate heiress. It now hangs in its carefully restored frame, on its old place, at the foot of the historic bed, and the tapping on the wainscot in Halesbury Manor has been heard no more. That's Alan Upward, 1906, The Tapping on the Wainscot, from the Mike Ashley edited Occult Detectives Stories Fighters of Fear, published by Talos Press, an imprint of Skyhorse Publishing. Very good stuff. I like that. And let's give you something else that's kind of unusual and strange. Let's look at some of the mystery files over here. See what we can see. I'm not going to read more Tower. I have more written, but I'm not going to read more Tower. Let's see some strange stuff. The Man Who Fell from the Sky, page 142. For weirdness. Here we go. The Man Who Fell from the Sky. In every sense, Alfred Lowenstein was flying high. This is from 1928. The third richest man on the planet, the Belgian businessman's empire showed no signs of shrinking. He enjoyed success in electrics, investment, and capital. He was trying to buy a large Brazilian infrastructure company. He had winning racehorses. It is even said he was making money in the market, in the murkier world of crime. World leaders sought his company. Heads of state consulted with him on global matters. But one day, when he was flying high above the English Channel, Lowenstein disappeared. On a flight from London to Brussels, his companions discovered the plane's entrance was open, and he had gone. A bizarre accident, self-inflicted, or something more sinister? The questions are yet to be answered. The events. Alfred Lowenstein was born to a German Jewish banker in Brussels in 1877. Despite his father's background, he was a proud Belgian, holy Belgium, man, and a proud Catholic. Following in his father's footsteps, he made his initial fortune in finance, and by 1914, he was a hugely wealthy man. That same year saw the onset of World War I, and Lowenstein offered the Belgian government, in exile due to the hostilities, a $50 million interest-free loan, interest-free. And in return, he wanted permission to print Belgian francs. It was an audacious move that underlined his ambitious nature, and it was refused. Lowenstein lived out the war in Britain, where he went into business with Sir James Dunn, making £1 million on an investment in a British chemical company. Other ventures included vast profits in electrical companies, plus an investment portfolio that had money men from London to New York salivating. This was indeed the Pied Piper of pre-World War II businessmen. The co-pilot is here, by the way, talking about planes. Away from business lunches and million-dollar deals, Lowenstein loved racehorses, but like most things in life, one or two alone wouldn't do. He owned a stable of a successful group of steeplechase horses that won the 1926 and 28 Grand Steeplechase in Paris. Like everything Lowenstein touched, it seemed his horse was always the first to cross the finish line. Well, one wonders what happened to him here. Was he greedy for more? And if so, was that enough to tempt Lowenstein into the world of underground crime? Not long before he disappeared from the plane, it is said that he had taken steps into narcotics, doing deals with American racketeer and mobster Arnold Rothstein to increase the already growing supply of heroin in America. He could have worked for the CIA, and with the hope, or the British government, of course, and with the hope of creating a vastly lucrative drug ring spanning the United States and Europe. Fatal flight? On July 4th, 1928, Lowenstein and 6 companions took his private aircraft, a Fokker F-7A, and with a 3-meter trim motor, on a short flight from Croydon Airport near London to Brussels. At an altitude of 4,000 feet, it was a smooth summer's flight when Lowenstein took himself to the back of the plane to use the lavatory. It was the last time he was seen alive. His companions were confused, and so his secretary took himself through the one door that led to a short passage. There were 2 doors, one an entrance to the plane, the other to a small toilet. The secretary was shocked to find the plane's entrance flapping in the wind, and there was no sign of his boss. The shocked passengers and crew landed the plane on a beach near Dunkirk. The area was under French military control, and so the crew and Lowenstein's passengers were all detained and questioned. On July 19th, Lowenstein's body was found by fishermen and taken to France. Unremarkably badly bruised. The body was identified by the wristwatch he was wearing. His family requested an autopsy, and it was decreed that his was an accidental death, but that he had been alive when he struck the water. Was it that simple, however? There are theories about his death. All right. Yeah, I see you, buddy.
Almost. A week before Lowenstein's body was found, tests were carried out on the aircraft's door by the British Air Ministry. At 1,000 feet, a man from the ministry threw himself at the door. It opened only slightly, but such was the force of the slipstream outside, the door was slammed back and the man was thrown to the ground. It was decided that it would have been impossible for a 51-year-old man to simply open the door by mistake and fall out. However, nothing further was made of this find. It might have been suicide, or perhaps Lowenstein faked his death. Both are possible, as his businesses were leveraged and very volatile. The most sinister guess is that he was murdered. Was it by those he had recently done criminal deals with whom he had done deals? Perhaps it was his business partners, Albert Pam and Frederick Sarvesi, who stood to make a lot of money. Maybe. But in time, more suspicions have fallen upon the millionaire's wife, Madeline. It is said that she, with the knowledge of Lowenstein's employees, had the pilot, Donald Drew, take off the door, throw out her husband, then land the plane on the beach and reattach the door before the French authorities detained them. No further investigation followed, though, and so Lowenstein's death was filed under accidental. The man who had it all was buried in an unmarked grave. His wife did not attend the funeral. I wonder if there are any portraits in his bedroom. Good stuff. Hello, co-pilot. How you doing there, buddy? We need the co-pilot cam. That's what we need. All right. So this month we're going to have a good time covering some cool stuff with the very, very awesome Lucius Leffing. We'll talk about Lucius Leffing. We'll read hopefully the end of Tower and maybe do like a marathon session where, you know, for a number of hours or a couple days in a row as part of the fundraiser for the publishing company. We could do that. That'd be really cool. We could do that. I'll read Tower once it's all done. That'll be a lot of fun. That'll be cool. Of course, you can always play these in your car if you just want to listen to something on your way to work or whatever. You can even hear the kitty cat meowing. Hi, buddy. Hi. Yeah, that'll be cool. I see you right there. I know you're right there. And in fact, let me do this real quick. I'm going to put this on the screen and I'll be right back. I'm just going to get a little something special for the co-pilot here because she's such a good co-pilot. Okay, co-pilot, you ready? Okay, you can tell that I'm moving about here and I'm not going to get knocked out. No way am I going to get tossed out of here. Not a chance. I'm not going to end up in the English Channel or something like that. No way, Jose. There you go, co-pilot. And I got to do a little bit more. And I'm going to bring myself back on the screen. So what'd you think, everybody? That was a pretty cool little, haunting story. Nowadays, I guess many people expect something that's even more of a twist or, that sort of thing. I think back then they didn't expect as much from the stories. So maybe, it was kind of a comforting story. It's sort of your cozy supernatural mystery. I think Joseph Payne Brennan, he's of the modern mind, and Joseph Payne Brennan, clearly when he does his Lucius Leffing stuff, he's got some good ones. But what's cool about the Lucius Leffing things is they're from the modern day. They're from the contemporary, but with Lucius Leffing, he has a character that he's built who is a fan of Victoriana. And so you get an almost Holmes-like character in Lucius Leffing as Joseph Payne Brennan hangs out with him and helps solve these mysterious happenings, that sort of thing. Hey, I want to remind you also, everybody, if you get the opportunity, over at the Liberty Conspiracy channel on Rumble, you'll see that we have a couple new videos posted. There's our live thing over there, but you'll see we have the Trump tariff harms grow. We have the Federal Reserve and how it's giving money to municipalities. You might want to spread that one around. And then this one, Democrats and GOP argue over Medicare for the new budget. At the same time, they're handing a lot of your money to Israel, which has a socialized medical system, and a few other things. And also, you can also head on over to the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel, and you'll see that we've got a few of them that hopefully you'll really dig. So I'm just going to go over to the latest of the former Star Trek Writing Fellows stories. And you'll find there's an hour-long one there. Former Star Trek Writing Fellow, episode 27, live reading, The Green Spider from last week from Sax Romer. Very cool. With a picture, of course, of Christopher Lee, creator of Fu Manchu. Yeah, that's right. That's right, man. And if you go to my Substack and you're one of the paid subscribers, you'll see the Liberty Conspiracy news notes for 10/3/25. That's a great way to support what we do. You can also contribute. Hey, Kitty, I'll see you in a bit. You can also contribute via Rumble if you want to subscribe over there. And inside the audio posts at my Substack, Gardner Goldsmith Substack, every time we have the audio for the show, for Liberty Conspiracy, down at the bottom, I try to consistently put in the PayPal link if you want to do the PayPal. And my post office box is there here in lovely Amherst, New Hampshire-Ansky. So there you go. There is that. And I was looking blurry there. That's weird. The camera sometimes gets crazy like that. Skunk Hollow, thanks, man. Brandon, thank you. He says, great story, Guard. Thanks. Thanks, man. I was going to read Sigil, which is in my Bite novella. That's the one about the guy sitting there and he's reading his diary. I'll wait till next week on that one for Sigil. It's a super short one, but I'll wait because I thought, a couple of those things nice for nice calming Friday, that sort of thing. And anybody wants to send me an idea for reading of a short story, if you got one that's in the public domain, just send me the link. We'll check it out. I think it'd be a lot of fun. I love reading these stories. Like I said, it's a great incentive for me to read something. I have to perform. I've got to do it. I'm not going to sit there and start falling asleep. I'm right in front of you. Got to do it right as best as I can, right? I love reading stories. It's fun. Thanks for being there, Skunk Hollow. Thanks for being there, everybody. Brandon, thank you, buddy. And we'll say goodnight for now. I'm going to leave you all with the Outer Limits outro, and we'll go back with the control voice. Remember, you can find the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel on YouTube and Rumble. I hope you'll spread the word about that. Send the links out to people. We'll start talking about film production and television production. I was talking about that earlier today, about being in the story department for Star Trek Voyager and breaking down the story ideas and stuff. That was always fun. And I'll talk about the Outer Limits too. That was cool up in Vancouver. Beautiful area. All right. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting the show with links, contributions. That's always key. And thanks also for the positive words, even though I'm not doing the work for MRC TV anymore. That's all done. So we're going to do more here. Love your support. And thanks for the positive vibes about the work that I did get to do for them. Hopefully it's giving people some good information. And hopefully this has been entertaining too. Outer Limits.
Now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to the Outer Limits.